It was late evening in the old city opera house. The audience had already left, and the lights above the grand stage were dimmed to a soft golden glow. The red velvet curtains hung still, and the air was heavy with the scent of dust, polish, and old wood. A quiet figure pushed a cleaning cart down the aisle, his footsteps echoing softly across the empty seats. He was a man no one paid much attention to, the janitor, the one who stayed behind after everyone else went home. Every night, when the musicians packed their instruments and the singers stopped their warm-ups, he arrived with his mop, broom, and quiet patience. His uniform was faded, his shoes worn from years of work, and his face carried the calm look of someone who had learned to live quietly. The opera house was his world, though not in the way most people imagined. While others came here to perform under the bright lights, he came to sweep under them. He knew every corner of the building, the cracked tiles near the backstage door, the smell of coffee that always lingered in the rehearsal room, and the grand piano that stood proudly in the center of the stage. That piano, polished and majestic, was more than just an instrument to him. It was a memory of another life. When he was younger, he had dreamed of sitting before a crowd, letting music pour out from his fingertips. He used to spend hours practicing, imagining himself under the same kind of lights that now shone above him. But dreams, like candles in the wind, can flicker out too soon. Life had been unkind, responsibilities had arrived too early, money was always short, and every opportunity to chase his music slipped away. One day he simply stopped playing. The piano that had once been his best friend became a painful reminder of what he'd lost. Now, years later, he cleaned the very kind of stage he once dreamed of performing on. Each night, when everyone left, he quietly walked to the piano and dusted it carefully. Sometimes his fingers hovered above the keys. He could almost hear the music in his mind like a whisper calling him back. But he never played. It felt wrong, as if he no longer had the right. That night was no different. He walked to the stage, turned on a small work light, and began sweeping the floor. His eyes drifted toward the piano, gleaming under the dim light. For a moment he stopped sweeping and just stared at it. He smiled sadly. "You've had quite a night," he murmured softly, almost as if the piano could hear him. "All that applause must feel good." The piano, of course, said nothing. It only stood there, silent and proud. He chuckled quietly at his own words and continued cleaning. He had been working there for over 10 years. In that time, he had seen hundreds of performers come and go, young, talented, confident, all chasing their dreams. Some were kind enough to smile or nod at him. Most didn't notice him at all. He didn't mind. He had learned that the world doesn't always see the quiet ones. As he moved around the stage, he hummed softly to himself, an old tune he once played long ago. The sound of his voice echoed faintly through the empty opera house. There was something peaceful about these late hours, when it was just him and the sound of his broom gliding across the wooden floor. He often imagined what it would be like to perform again, even just once. But then reality would return, reminding him that those days were gone. His hands, once nimble and strong, were now rough and tired. His eyes weren't as sharp. His back ached from bending over floors every day. "You're just the janitor now," he often told himself. And that's okay. Still, that didn't stop the music from living inside him. Every sound in the opera house became a rhythm. The creak of a chair, the squeak of the mop, the distant hum of lights. It all formed a quiet symphony that only he could hear. One night, after finishing his shift, he lingered a little longer. He sat on one of the front seats, gazing at the piano. The stage looked lonely, bathed in a half-light. He wondered who would play it next. Maybe a young pianist with bright eyes and confident hands. Someone with the life he once dreamed of. His mind drifted to his past. The small apartment where he grew up, the broken upright piano his father had bought secondhand, and the nights when his mother would sit beside him, listening quietly as he practiced. She used to close her eyes and say, "One day they'll all know your music." He had believed her once. But she passed away before that day ever came. After she was gone, the music never sounded the same. Now, as he sat in the empty opera hall, those memories came back like ghosts. He could almost hear her voice again. "Play something," it seemed to say. "Just one song." He shook his head and stood up. "No," he whispered to himself. "That part of life is over." He turned to leave, but his eyes fell on the piano one more time. The lid was slightly open. He hesitated. Then, almost without realizing, he walked toward it. He stopped at the bench. His heart began to beat faster. He looked around. The opera house was empty, silent. No one would see. No one would laugh. He sat down slowly. His hands trembled as he rested them above the keys. For a long moment he didn't move. Then gently, he pressed one key. The sound was pure and warm. It filled the empty hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. He pressed another key. Then another. His body remembered what his mind had forgotten. The melody came back soft and trembling like an old friend returning after years apart. He closed his eyes and let his fingers wander. The notes began to form a song, the same one he used to play for his mother. It was gentle at first, then fuller, richer. His hands moved faster, finding strength he didn't know he still had. The music filled the room, rising and falling like waves. For a few minutes, he wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't sweeping floors or polishing brass. He was alive in the music again, every note carrying years of emotion, love, regret, longing, hope. His face softened, and tears slipped quietly down his cheeks. When he finally stopped, the sound of the last note lingered in the air before fading into silence. He sat still, breathing heavily, staring at his hands. They looked different now, not tired, but alive. He smiled faintly. "Still there," he whispered. The moment was gone as quickly as it came. He wiped his face, stood up, and looked around again to make sure no one had seen him. The hall remained empty, peaceful. He closed the piano lid gently and went back to his cleaning cart. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt like the person he once was, the young dreamer who believed music could change lives. He didn't know that the following day would change everything. He didn't know that someone would hear him play and that his quiet world was about to awaken in ways he never imagined. For now, he simply gathered his things and walked out of the opera house, locking the door behind him. The night air outside was cool and still. He looked up at the sky, then smiled quietly to himself. Maybe dreams don't really die, he thought. Maybe they just wait, until we're brave enough to touch them again. He walked home slowly, humming the same tune he had just played. Somewhere deep inside, the old fire that he thought was gone forever began to flicker again. The janitor didn't know it yet, but his life was about to take a turn that would make the whole world listen. The morning sun shone softly through the tall windows of the opera house. Dust sparkled in the light as people hurried in and out. Singers carrying sheet music, stage workers rolling cables, and assistants checking schedules. It was another busy day of rehearsals. The janitor arrived quietly as always, pushing his cart through the backstage corridor. No one really noticed him. He liked it that way. He nodded politely to people passing by, his face calm, his eyes gentle. Inside, though, his mind was still full of the melody he had played the night before. All morning, as he swept and wiped the floors, that song kept returning to him. The feeling of the piano keys under his fingers, the echo of sound in the empty hall, it felt like a dream he didn't want to wake up from. He even caught himself humming while he worked. At noon, the young opera director came in earlier than usual. She was new, energetic, and always in a rush. She was preparing for an upcoming talent showcase, a big event where the opera house would host open auditions. She carried a folder full of notes and looked slightly stressed. When she entered the main hall, she saw the janitor standing on the stage, mopping near the piano. Without looking closely, she assumed he was one of the new stagehands. "Excuse me," she said sharply, walking toward him. "Can you clean this area quickly, please? We have auditions starting soon." The janitor nodded respectfully. "Of course," he said softly, lowering his eyes. She didn't realize who he was or that she had spoken to him before. To her, he was just another worker on a long list of people keeping the show running smoothly. He finished mopping and started wiping down the piano, just as he always did. The director left the stage for a moment, still talking into her phone. The hall grew quiet again. The piano lid was slightly open and a single ray of light fell across the white keys. He hesitated. His heart began to beat faster. He knew he shouldn't. It wasn't his place. But something inside him whispered, "Just one song." He looked around. The hall seemed empty. The director's voice echoed faintly from the other side of the curtain. He sat down on the bench. For a moment he didn't move. Then slowly his fingers touched the keys. The first note was soft like a sigh. The sound filled the room gently, wrapping around the empty seats and echoing back from the high ceiling. He closed his eyes and began to play. The melody was the same one he had played the night before, but now it flowed more freely, filled with quiet strength. His fingers moved with emotion, finding every note naturally as if the music had been waiting inside him all along. The hall seemed to come alive again. Each note told a story, of lost chances, old love, and quiet hope. The janitor forgot where he was, forgot who he was supposed to be. In that moment there was only the music, but he didn't know someone was listening. Behind the curtain, the opera director had returned. She had stopped talking on the phone the second she heard the sound. Her eyes widened as she stood completely still, listening. The melody was unlike anything she'd heard before, raw, emotional, real. It wasn't just beautiful. It was honest. She peeked through the curtain and saw the janitor sitting there, lost in the music, his head slightly bowed. The sight stunned her. She didn't know what surprised her more, that the janitor was playing or that he was playing like a master. The music swelled, reaching its peak. It filled the opera house like a living thing, touching every corner, every seat. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The last note faded into silence. The janitor opened his eyes slowly. For a few seconds he just sat there, breathing deeply, feeling both full and empty at once. He smiled faintly, almost sadly, and stood up. He turned, and that's when he saw her standing there. She had stepped out from behind the curtain, staring at him as if she had just seen something unbelievable. "Oh," he started, startled. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched the piano. I was just cleaning and—" The director shook her head, still stunned. "Wait, did you just play that?" He looked nervous. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll get back to work right away." She walked closer, her expression serious but kind. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" He hesitated. "It was a long time ago. I used to play when I was younger." "You used to?" she repeated. That didn't sound like someone who used to. That sounded like someone who never stopped. He smiled faintly. "Life gets in the way sometimes," he said softly. "Dreams don't always pay the bills." The director studied him for a moment. There was something humble and genuine about him. No pride, no showmanship, just truth. "What's your name?" she asked. He told her quietly. "I want you to come back tomorrow," she said. "Same time." "Can you do that?" He looked confused. "Why?" "Because I want to hear you play again," she said. "Properly. On stage." He blinked, unsure if she was serious. "I'm just the janitor," he said. "I don't perform." "Well, you should," she replied firmly. "That music. It's something special. Don't waste it." He looked down at the floor, speechless. No one had spoken to him like that in years. The director smiled slightly. "Tomorrow," she said again and turned to leave. He stood there for a long time after she left, trying to understand what had just happened. His heart felt heavy and light all at once. That night when he went home, he couldn't sleep. Her words kept replaying in his mind. "Don't waste it." He sat by his small kitchen table, sipping tea, staring at his rough hands. They didn't look like a musician's hands anymore. They were worn, tired, marked by years of work. Could those hands still make music that mattered? He looked at the small clock on the wall. It was past midnight, but he couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow. The next morning he arrived early before anyone else. The hall was quiet again, the way he liked it. He stood on the stage looking at the piano. His heart raced. He wasn't sure if he should wait for her or just start cleaning as usual. He decided to polish the instrument again. It gave him something to do while his mind calmed down. Soon he heard footsteps. The director entered, holding a cup of coffee. She smiled when she saw him. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he replied softly. She placed the cup on the edge of the stage. "I told a few of the staff to join us," she said. "They need to hear this too." His face went pale. "Staff?" he repeated. "I don't think I can—" "You can," she interrupted gently. "Just play like you did yesterday. Forget we're even here." He took a deep breath. Slowly, he sat at the piano again. His hands hovered above the keys. The moment felt unreal. When he started playing, the room fell completely silent. The same melody returned, soft, emotional, sincere. Every note carried something deeper, something only life could teach. The few staff members who had gathered nearby stood frozen, listening. Even the stagehands stopped moving. The music felt alive, almost human, full of pain and beauty mixed together. When he finished, there was silence again. No one spoke for several seconds. Then slowly the director began to clap. The others followed, their applause echoing through the hall. He looked embarrassed. "Please don't," he said softly. "I don't deserve that," but she smiled. "Yes, you do," she said. "You have a gift, one that deserves to be shared." He didn't know what to say. For so long he had believed his time had passed, that dreams were for younger men, stronger men. But standing there, hearing that applause, something inside him began to change. The director looked at him seriously. "There's a charity gala next week," she said. "I want you to play something there." He froze. "Me? No, I couldn't." "You can," she said firmly. "Please think about it. The audience needs to hear you." He didn't answer. He just stood there, unsure whether to believe what he was hearing. That night, as he walked home again under the streetlights, the city felt different. The air seemed lighter, the world a little brighter. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in many years it didn't scare him. As he passed a shop window, he caught his reflection, a simple man in a worn jacket, but behind those tired eyes, there was something new, hope. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. The morning of the next day felt different for the janitor. He woke up before sunrise, long before his alarm went off. He sat at the edge of his small bed for a moment, staring at the faint light creeping through the curtains. His hands rested on his knees, rough and calloused, but there was something new in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet sense of purpose. The director's words from the day before echoed in his mind. "You have a gift, one that deserves to be shared." He had spent most of the night thinking about them. Part of him was scared that maybe she was wrong, that maybe the music wasn't as good as she thought. But another part deep inside wanted to believe her. For so long he had been invisible. Now suddenly someone had seen him. Someone believed in him again. He made himself a small breakfast, though he barely touched it. His stomach was too full of nerves. Before leaving for work, he stood in front of a small old photograph on the wall, his mother's photo. She was smiling in it, holding his shoulder proudly from years ago when he had just performed at a small school concert. "You'll make the world listen one day," she had told him back then. He smiled faintly. "I'm trying again, Mama," he whispered softly before heading out the door. When he arrived at the opera house, the hallways were already busy. Workers were moving props, singers were rehearsing in separate rooms, and the sound of instruments tuning filled the air. But amid all that noise, his thoughts were quiet and focused. As he entered the main hall, the director spotted him immediately. She smiled warmly. "You're early," she said. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep much." "I'm glad," she said with a grin. "We have something to talk about." He followed her to the stage where a few staff members were adjusting the lights. She handed him a small folder. Inside were sheets of music, simple arrangements, mostly classical pieces. "I thought we could try something like this," she said. "It's elegant and fits the tone of the gala. But if you'd rather play something of your own, that's fine too." He ran his fingers over the sheets, then looked up at her. "May I play my own piece?" he asked softly, her eyes lit up. "Of course," she said. "That would be even better." He smiled a little. "It's a song I wrote a long time ago. I never thought anyone would hear it." "Well," she replied, "they're going to now." They spent the next few hours planning. The director wanted the performance to be simple. No fancy lights, no background instruments, just him and the piano. "The emotion in your playing is enough," she said. "We don't need to add anything else." When she left to attend another meeting, he stayed behind on the stage. He sat at the piano alone again and began to practice. The sound filled the room, soft and rich. It wasn't perfect. His fingers stumbled a few times, but every note carried feeling. He played from his heart, and that was what made it real. Unbeknownst to him, a few staff members paused to listen quietly from the doorway. They didn't want to interrupt, but something about the way he played made them stop what they were doing. One of them whispered, "That's the janitor, isn't it?" The other nodded slowly, eyes wide. By the time he finished, the room was silent again. He looked around, thinking he was alone. Then he heard a soft clap. It was one of the stage workers smiling. "That was something else," the worker said quietly. The janitor smiled shyly and thanked him. Compliments still made him uncomfortable. That evening, when his shift ended, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he walked to a small park nearby. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink. He sat on a bench watching children play, listening to the faint sound of street musicians somewhere in the distance. He closed his eyes and imagined the gala, the lights, the audience, the grand piano. The thought made his chest tighten. He wasn't sure if he could really do it. It had been years since he had played in front of anyone, let alone a full crowd of important people. But then he remembered the look in the director's eyes when she heard him play. She had truly meant what she said. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to live the dream he'd buried long ago. When he returned home, he practiced again. But not on a real piano. He didn't own one. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, using his fingers to tap out the notes on the wood. He knew every key by memory. He could hear the melody in his head as clearly as if it were real. He played until midnight, whispering the rhythm to himself. 1, 2, 3. Slow here. Hold that note. Each night that week, he did the same. Work during the day, practice in silence at night. The neighbors sometimes heard the soft tapping and thought he was fixing something, not realizing he was preparing for one of the biggest moments of his life. By the end of the week, his nerves had settled a little. He still felt anxious, but beneath that was excitement, a spark of the old fire he once had. A few days later, he was sweeping near the stage when two young performers approached him. One of them said shyly, "Sir, are you the one playing at the gala?" He looked surprised. "How did you know that?" "We heard," the other said. "Everyone's talking about it." "The janitor who plays like a master." He smiled faintly and shook his head. "I'm no master," he said. "Just someone who loves music?" The young man grinned. "Well, we can't wait to hear you." Their words filled him with warmth. It had been a long time since anyone looked at him with admiration. Later that day, the director called him to her office. "Everything's set for the gala," she said. "You'll be the final act of the night." His eyes widened. "The last one?" She nodded. "It's the most important spot. You'll close the show. Trust me. Once you start playing, they won't want it to end." He didn't know what to say. He felt both honored and terrified. As the day of the gala drew closer, he became more and more restless. Each night he would sit at home, staring at his hands, wondering if they would obey him when the time came. He even considered backing out once or twice, but every time he thought about quitting, he remembered his mother's words, and the feeling he had when he first touched the piano again. He knew he had to do this, not for fame, not for money, but for the boy he used to be, the one who never got the chance to show what he could do. The night before the gala, he stayed late at the opera house. The hall was empty and silent again, just like it was that first night. He sat at the piano and began to play his piece one last time. The melody flowed easily now, gentle and sure. As he played, he imagined the audience in front of him, strangers watching quietly, waiting for him to begin. He felt the weight of years lifting from his shoulders with every note. When he finished, he stayed seated for a long time, staring at the keys. He didn't cry, but his eyes shone with quiet emotion. The director appeared behind him, walking softly. She had been watching for a while without saying a word. When the music stopped, she said quietly, "You're ready?" He turned to her and smiled faintly. "I hope so," she nodded. "Don't hope. Know it." He chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You sound like my mother." "She must have been wise," the director said. "She was," he replied softly. "She always believed I'd play for people again. I just never thought it would take this long." The director smiled warmly. "Sometimes life delays the best things until we're truly ready for them." He looked back at the piano. "Maybe you're right." She walked toward the exit, then turned back. Get some rest, she said. Tomorrow's your night. When she left, he sat there in silence for a few more minutes. The stage lights were dim, casting long shadows across the floor. He looked up at them and whispered, "Tomorrow, Mama, I'll play for you." Then he stood, gathered his things, and walked out into the cool night air. As he made his way home, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades, not fear, not sadness, but quiet joy. He wasn't sure what would happen tomorrow, but he knew one thing for certain. He would play his heart out. Whatever came after that didn't matter. For the first time in years, he felt alive. The day of the charity gala arrived. The opera house looked brighter than ever before. From early morning, people rushed through the corridors carrying boxes, decorations, and sound equipment. Flowers were being arranged near the stage entrance, and the smell of polish and perfume filled the air. It was a night everyone had been waiting for, but for one man, it was more than an event. It was the moment that would change his life forever. He arrived earlier than usual, wearing a plain gray suit that he had borrowed from one of the stage workers. It was a little loose on him, but it was clean and neat. He had even polished his shoes the night before, though they were old and scuffed. As he stood in the dressing area, he looked at his reflection in a small mirror. The man looking back didn't seem like a performer. He still looked like the janitor he had always been, but inside something had shifted. His heart was beating faster than usual and his hands trembled slightly. He tried to calm himself, whispering under his breath, "It's just another night. Another stage. Another piano." Yet he knew it wasn't. This was the first time in decades that he would sit before an audience, not to clean the stage, but to fill it with music. Outside the building, cars began arriving. One by one, guests stepped out. Men in suits, women in elegant dresses, cameras flashing as they entered the grand hall. The event was not just a local celebration. It had drawn attention from newspapers and even a few television stations. Famous singers, orchestra members, and donors were all in attendance. Behind the curtain, he could hear the hum of conversation and laughter. The sound made him more nervous. The director walked in, clipboard in hand, looking both busy and excited. When she saw him, her face softened. "You look great," she said. He smiled shyly. "It's been a long time since I've dressed like this. Tonight is special," she said. "Are you ready?" He hesitated, then nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember, you're not just playing notes. You're telling your story. Let them feel it." He nodded again, swallowing hard. As the gala began, he waited quietly backstage, listening to the performances before his. The orchestra played, followed by a few singers and a violin solo. The audience clapped warmly after each act. He peeked through the side curtain a few times, his heart pounding at the sight of the huge crowd. Hundreds of faces watching, listening, waiting. When the violinist finished, there was a short break. Then the director stepped on stage to speak. Her voice carried clearly through the speakers. "Tonight," she began, "we've heard wonderful music from talented performers. But our final act is something truly special. It's a story about passion, perseverance, and rediscovery." The audience quieted, curious. She smiled faintly and continued, "Sometimes talent hides in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you pass every day without noticing carries a song inside them that could move the world. Tonight, we are honored to share one of those songs with you." There was a soft murmur among the audience. They looked at one another, wondering what she meant. Then she turned toward the side of the stage and said, "Please welcome our very own pianist." He froze for a moment. His legs felt heavy. His heart beat so loudly he could hear it echoing in his ears. "Go on," whispered one of the stage crew with a smile. "It's your time." He took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. For a second, he was blinded by the bright lights. The room seemed endless, rows upon rows of people all looking at him. He could feel their confusion. Many of them recognized him as the man who usually swept the floor after events. Now he was walking toward the grand piano under the spotlight. A few people whispered quietly, unsure what to expect. He reached the piano and stood for a moment, taking it all in, the shining keys, the soft glow of the lights, the heavy silence of hundreds of eyes watching. His hands trembled as he sat down on the bench. He closed his eyes, took one long, deep breath and whispered to himself, "For you, Mama." Then he began to play. At first, The notes came softly, almost like a whisper. The sound was delicate and hesitant, as if the piano itself was waking up. But as the melody unfolded, his hands grew steadier. The room grew quiet. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the emotion flowing from every key. The piece he played wasn't written by any famous composer. It was his own. The song he had composed years ago, back when his mother was alive. It was full of memories, the joy of his youth, the pain of lost dreams, and the warmth of love that never faded. Every note seemed to speak. It told the story of a man who once had dreams, who lost them and who found them again in the quiet corners of his life. The music rose higher, then softened again, like a sigh. His eyes were closed, his face calm and full of feeling. It was as if he wasn't on a stage at all, but in another world, one where only he and the music existed. In the audience, people sat still, listening in silence. Some felt tears forming in their eyes without even knowing why. The melody touched something deep, something human and real. When the final note came, it hung in the air for several long seconds. Then it faded slowly into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The opera house was completely still. The man sat there with his head bowed, his hands resting gently on the keys. Then softly at first, someone began to clap. The sound grew louder. Soon the entire room was filled with applause. People stood up from their seats, cheering, clapping, some even shouting, "Bravo!" He looked up, startled. His eyes widened as he saw the entire audience standing for him. The sight was overwhelming. His heart swelled with emotion, and he felt tears fill his eyes. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak. The director appeared at the side of the stage, clapping proudly, her eyes shining. She gestured for him to take a bow. He stood slowly and bowed deeply, his chest trembling with emotion. The applause went on for a long time. Cameras flashed. People wiped tears from their faces. In that moment, the janitor, the man who had once swept the stage, stood under the same lights as a performer, not a worker. And the world saw him for who he truly was. A musician with a soul full of music and heart. When he stepped backstage, the crew surrounded him with smiles and congratulations. Some hugged him, others simply shook his hand. "You were amazing," one said. "That was the best performance of the night," another added. He didn't know what to say. He could only smile, still in disbelief. The director walked up to him, her expression soft and proud. "I told you," she said. "They needed to hear your story." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me." She shook her head. "You did this. You just needed a chance." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had spent years cleaning, scrubbing, lifting. Now those hands had given something beautiful to the world. Later that night, when the hall was empty again and the lights dimmed, he walked back onto the stage one last time. The applause still echoed in his mind. He stood there quietly, looking out at the empty seats. He placed his hand on the piano and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. Then he sat down and played again, not for anyone else, but for himself. The notes floated into the dark hall, gentle and full of peace. For the first time in years, he felt complete. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the opera house. The golden light touched every corner, making the old wooden floor shine. The stage was quiet now. The decorations had been taken down, and only the faint smell of flowers and polish remained. He walked slowly across the stage, pushing a small cleaning cart as he had done for years. But something felt different this time. The same steps that once felt heavy now felt lighter. The stage didn't seem like just a workplace anymore. It felt alive, like it remembered what had happened the night before. He stopped beside the piano, the same piano that had changed everything. He rested his hand gently on it as if greeting an old friend. His reflection shimmered faintly in the black surface, and he smiled softly. He could still hear the applause in his mind. The echo of hundreds of people standing, clapping, cheering. It didn't feel real. He had never imagined that a single performance could cause such a wave of emotion, not only in the audience, but inside him too. He had played for years in silence. For himself, for his late mother, for the music that never left his heart. But last night, for the first time in decades, others had heard it too. And they had understood. As he began sweeping the stage, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see the director walking toward him, holding a cup of coffee. She looked both tired and thrilled, her smile still fresh from the night before. "Still cleaning?" she asked teasingly. He chuckled softly. "Old habits," he said. "The floor doesn't clean itself." She handed him the coffee. "You don't have to clean today. You earned a rest." He accepted the cup, feeling its warmth. "Rest feels strange after a night like that." She nodded. "You know, we've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, music schools, even a few orchestra managers. They all want to know about you." He froze. "About me?" "Yes. People can't stop talking about your performance. Some are calling it the most moving piano moment they've ever witnessed." He blinked, not sure how to respond. "That can't be true," he said shyly. "It was just one song." "One song," she repeated, smiling. "But it carried more heart than most concerts I've ever seen." He looked down, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to praise. For so long, people barely noticed him. Now, all of a sudden, everyone wanted to know his story. "I don't even know what I'd tell them," he murmured. "I'm just me." "That's exactly why they'll listen," she said softly, "because your story is real." Later that day, she convinced him to sit for a short interview in the Opera House office. A local journalist came with a camera and microphone, smiling warmly as they sat down. He felt nervous again, fidgeting with his hands. "Don't worry," said the reporter kindly. "Just speak from the heart." So he did. He told them how he used to love music when he was young, how his mother had been his biggest supporter, how life had forced him to let go of his dreams when she fell ill, and how he'd taken any job he could find just to survive. He talked about cleaning the opera house, about how being close to music kept him going, even when he could no longer play on a real stage. And finally, he spoke about the night before, about how strange and beautiful it felt to sit down and play again, after all those silent years. The reporter listened quietly, eyes glistening. When they finished, she thanked him softly and said, "People need to hear stories like yours. It gives hope." That evening, his story appeared online. A short clip of his performance spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, thousands of people had shared it. The headline read, "Opera House Janitor Stuns Audience with Soulful Piano Performance." By morning, it was everywhere. The video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from around the world. People wrote things like, "I cried watching this," and "This man is proof that dreams never die." He didn't even have a computer at home, but one of the younger stage workers showed him on their phone. He stared at the screen, watching himself play under the bright lights. It felt strange, like watching another person. "I don't understand," he said softly. "Why me?" "Because you reminded people that music isn't about fame," the worker said. "It's about feeling." Days passed and his life began to change. He was invited to appear on local radio and even on a morning talk show. He was shy at first, uncomfortable with the attention. But he spoke gently and honestly, always thanking the Opera House and his colleagues for giving him a chance. He still did his cleaning rounds every morning, even when others told him he didn't need to anymore. "I'm not too good for this," he said once with a smile. "This stage gave me back my music. The least I can do is keep it clean." One afternoon, a man in a dark suit came to see him. He introduced himself as a representative from a well-known music academy. "We saw your performance," the man said, "and we'd like to offer you a special position. You could teach or mentor students if you'd like." He was speechless. "Teach?" he asked slowly. "I never studied at a big academy." The man smiled. "You don't need a certificate to teach what you know. You have something more valuable: experience and heart." He didn't say yes right away. That night he sat alone at the piano again, thinking. The hall was empty except for the faint sound of his own breathing. He thought of his younger self, the boy who dreamed of playing before a crowd, the man who gave up everything to care for his mother. the janitor who swept floors while humming old melodies under his breath. And now, the same man was being asked to teach others how to play. He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time," he whispered. The next morning, he accepted the offer. A few weeks later, he began visiting the academy twice a week. At first, the students were unsure. They had heard stories but didn't quite know what to expect. He didn't come in with fancy clothes or strict lessons. Instead, he began each class by asking them one simple question. "Why do you play?" Some said because they loved the sound. Others said because their parents wanted them to. He nodded at each answer. Then he told them gently, "If you don't play with feeling, the piano is just wood and strings, but if you play from your heart, it becomes alive." He shared small lessons, not just about technique, but about life. He told them about patience, about finding beauty in mistakes, and about how music could heal the parts of you that words could not reach. The students began to love him. They called him Master affectionately, though he always laughed and said, "Just call me by my name." At the opera house, his co-workers still saw him as one of their own. Even though the world now knew his story, he never acted different. He still helped fix lights, move chairs, and polish the floors. But sometimes when the hall was empty, someone would find him at the piano, lost in a melody. Months passed, and the gala performance remained a cherished memory for everyone who had been there. But for him, it was more than a memory. It was proof that it's never too late to be who you truly are. He received letters from people all over the world, from young musicians, retired teachers, even people who said his story had given them courage to start over. He kept the letters neatly folded in a box beside his bed. One evening, while watching the sunset through the opera house window, he turned to the director and said, "You know, I used to think my story ended when my dreams were lost. But maybe that was just the beginning." She smiled warmly. "Life has a strange way of circling back to what matters most." He nodded. "Yes, and maybe the stage isn't just for performers. Sometimes it's for those who clean it, because they understand its silence better than anyone else." The director's eyes softened. "You've become part of this place's history," she said. He chuckled quietly. "I just wanted to play one more time. I didn't expect all this." "Maybe that's why it happened," she said, "because it came from a place of truth." He looked out at the stage again, empty but glowing in the golden light of dusk. "I think music finds its way," he said softly, "even through dust and silence." And in that quiet moment, the opera house seemed to hum faintly, as if the walls themselves remembered his song. Time passed, but his name still carried a quiet echo in the music world. Months had turned into a year since that unforgettable night at the opera house. Yet people still spoke about it. The janitor who sat at the piano and moved hearts without saying a single word. The video of his performance had become something people shared whenever they needed hope. Teachers played it in classrooms to remind students that dreams don't fade with age. Musicians watched it when they felt discouraged. And in every corner of the world, people found a piece of themselves in his story. He never became a celebrity in the loud, glittering sense of the word. He didn't want to. Fame had never been his goal. What he wanted was peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've finally done what you were meant to do. He still worked at the opera house, though now his duties were lighter. The director insisted he didn't need to clean anymore, but he often helped anyway. "It keeps me grounded," he would say with a grin. Every morning he would arrive early, sweeping a few corners, arranging chairs, and polishing the piano keys before rehearsals. Then he would sit quietly and play a few notes to welcome the new day. Sometimes students from the academy would visit, eager to learn from him. They didn't come for fame or recognition. They came because they wanted to understand how to feel music the way he did. He never charged them. He only asked them to listen, not to him but to themselves. One young student once asked, "How do you know when you've played something right?" He smiled gently and replied, "When it makes you forget who you are for a moment, that's when it's right." He had a small apartment near the edge of town, simple and quiet. There were no awards on the walls, no fancy decorations, only a few framed photos. One of his late mother, one of the opera house and one of him sitting at the piano, taking the night of his big performance. He didn't look at them often, but whenever he did, a soft smile would cross his face. Sometimes letters still arrived, handwritten notes from strangers. People thanked him for inspiring them to pick up old dreams again, to start painting, writing, singing, or even just to believe in themselves after years of doubt. He kept all the letters in a wooden box by his window. When the weather was quiet and he could hear the distant sound of the city, he'd sit beside that box, open a few letters, and read them slowly. Each one felt like a small reminder that his music had gone far beyond the walls of that opera house. But what touched him the most was when people began coming to the opera house, not just for the grand shows, but to see him. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others wanted to hear him play again. At first, he felt shy about it. "I'm not a performer anymore," he would say. But the director encouraged him to hold small recitals, simple evenings where he played a few pieces and talked about his journey. The first one was held in the smaller hall upstairs. Only 30 people came. He sat behind the piano, hands trembling slightly, just like before. But as soon as he played, the nervousness faded. He didn't perform with fancy gestures or dramatic flair. His playing was calm, sincere, and full of quiet beauty. Between songs, he spoke to the audience in the same soft, genuine way he always did. He told them about how he used to dream of stages like that, how life had other plans, and how music stayed with him through every dark day. The audience listened in silence. When he finished, they stood and clapped, not because he was a famous musician, but because his honesty touched something inside them. From then on, he held a small concert every few months, always simple, always free. He would end each evening with the same words: "If you have something inside you, a dream, a song, a story, don't bury it. Even if years go by, it's still there waiting for you." People began calling him the man who made silence sing. One winter morning, the opera house held a special event in his honor. They didn't tell him in advance. They wanted it to be a surprise. When he arrived, the hall was already full. Musicians, students, and townspeople gathered around, clapping as he entered. On the stage stood the grand piano, the same one he had played on that magical night, polished and shining. A small plaque beside it read, "In honor of the man who reminded us that true music comes from the heart." He stared at it for a long moment, his eyes filling with tears. He turned to the director, speechless. "You deserve this," she said softly. "You gave this place its soul back." He tried to speak but couldn't. He simply placed his hand on the piano, feeling its smooth surface under his fingers. "Thank you," he finally whispered, "for everything." They asked him to play one song, just one. He sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody was simple, the same song he had played for his mother years ago, the one that had started it all. As the notes filled the air, time seemed to stop. The people in the room didn't see a janitor, or even a pianist. They saw a man who had lived, lost, and found his way back to himself through music. When he finished, the room erupted in applause once again. But this time it wasn't loud or wild. It was warm, like the sound of gratitude and love mixed together. After the ceremony, he stayed behind for a while. The hall slowly emptied, leaving only the faint echo of voices fading away. He sat alone at the piano, touching the keys one last time before standing. He walked to the window at the back of the stage. Outside, the sky was soft with evening light, turning gold at the edges. He stood there quietly, thinking about everything, his youth, the struggles, the nights spent cleaning while humming broken tunes, and the moment everything changed. He smiled to himself and whispered, "It was all worth it." In the months that followed, he began spending more time at the music academy, guiding students who reminded him of himself when he was young, shy, uncertain, full of dreams but afraid to believe in them. He told them stories about failure and hope, about how even the smallest step toward your dream can mean everything. He didn't give lessons from books or sheets of notes. He taught them to listen, to the sound of the world, to the rhythm of their own hearts. "That's where music begins," he would say. His students adored him. They often said his presence alone inspired them to play better. To them, he wasn't just a teacher. He was living proof that art could survive anything: time, hardship, even silence. Years went by quietly. The world outside changed, but inside the opera house the music remained. And so did he, steady as ever, smiling, always humming softly as he walked through the corridors. One evening, long after rehearsals ended, the director found him sitting at the piano again, playing a tune she didn't recognize. It was slow and peaceful, full of warmth and light. "That's new," she said from the doorway. He smiled without stopping. "Yes," he said. "I think it's my last one." She didn't understand what he meant then, but he did. That night he finished his song, closed the piano lid gently, and whispered a quiet thank you to the hall that had given him a second life. The next morning, when he didn't arrive at his usual time, the staff grew worried. They found him peacefully asleep in his chair by the window, a soft smile still on his face. His hands rested over a sheet of paper with a few handwritten notes, the melody he'd played the night before. The opera house mourned him deeply, but no one felt sadness for long. They remembered him not with tears but with gratitude. Every year on the anniversary of his performance, they held a small concert in his honor. Students, staff, and even visitors gathered to play his music, the same pieces that had once filled the hall with so much heart. And every time the first note rang out, it felt like he was still there, sweeping the stage, smiling, and waiting for the music to begin. His story lived on, not in fame or fortune, but in the hearts of those he inspired. He had shown the world that it's never too late to chase what's inside you, that even the quietest life can create the loudest echo if it's lived with truth and passion. And so, in the grand hall of the opera house, whenever the lights dim and the piano's first note rises, people still whisper his name softly, not as a janitor, not as a forgotten man, but as the one who reminded them that music, like hope, never truly fades.